Redemption, as defined by the dictionary, is the action of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil. Or, you know, the action of regaining or gaining possession of something in exchange for payment or clearing debt, but, you know, that's not really relevant to the video. So let's just move on to, when it comes to antagonists receiving redemption for their actions, it's honestly became quite the meme in the animation community these days. Like, oh my god, the amount of people that were screaming to high heaven because of how much of a ruthless, irredeemable bastard Jack Horner was actually incredible. But hey, that's on the film side of things, and I can admit there's been an issue in terms of antagonists there, at least on the Disney Pixar side. But that's for another day, probably, maybe. We're talking television here, and in that case, things are pretty different. Because even though these shows do have fantastic, irredeemable monsters, there's a lot of characters that get redemption in these shows. So class, today we're going to try and figure out just what makes a good redemption in these kind of shows, and what makes a bad one. Simple enough, right? Right? Well, let's go, woo! Okay. To clarify quickly on what characters are actually suitable for this video, I'm specifically referring to characters who are undeniably an antagonist at first. Like, actively trying to bring harm to our heroes and everything, and then by the end, they are, well, no longer seen as that. The main reason I'm saying this is to exclude the likes of Amity Blight, Pacifica Northwest, etc. These two are never seen as full-on antagonists, they're rivals at the start at very worst. Then there's characters that exist in a weird grey area, but this video is long enough, and I mean long enough by my standards. I'd love to do a movie-length epic, but don't quite know how that would perform, and covers more than enough characters already. Okay, so here's the thing. When somebody says the words cartoon redemption arc in that order, or honestly just redemption arc, it's kind of impossible to not think about Avatar's Zuko. And I mean, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Out of everyone on this list, this man is the creme de la creme of character arcs. You know it, I know it, it's layered, it's complex, it spans over multiple seasons, it's not a straight line of evil to good, and you get to see every step of the way in breathtaking detail. It's the one to beat, and I'm afraid to say none of the others do just that. But hey, it's not like they don't try their hardest. Well, okay, some of them do, we'll get to that. But why? Why is that? What does it do so wonderfully well? There's a good few factors that come together to make a really good redemption arc, so let's talk about them. First and foremost, before we even have them start to change, it's important to talk about...
Yeah, this would usually look cooler with the cloak, but I don't have it at the moment. Long story.
Because this is a pretty tricky line to walk. If they've not done anything really bad, well, it doesn't make for a particularly amazing redemption arc when they eventually turn to the side of good. But if they've done horrific things, and even worse, apparently enjoyed doing those horrific things, look, all I'm saying is you'd better make up for it when the time comes for redemption. I think that's why a lot of the actions and backgrounds of some of the characters featured here are often left pretty vague, open to interpretation. Like, you can only imagine what the likes of Hunter and Scorpia might have done in the past, as key parts of the Emperor's Coven or the Horde, especially considering what we see those factions do. But their characters are often lovable enough that it's overlooked. And hey, I'm not saying that's bad writing. The fact that these characters are able to connect so well to the audience despite what they might have done is testament to how good the characters are written. In Hunter's case, his guilt post-redemption seems to come from the fact that, well, he's a Grimwalker, essentially a clone of, well, the characters don't know exactly, but an important person to the main villain. Which could work, but the issue is that it doesn't really get resolved at all. Like, it's revealed to the characters that he isn't human almost offhandedly, and after that, beyond a really quick conversation, it's pretty much ignored. Hunter's arc is still really good overall, and we'll get further into it in time, but this part is definitely an outlier. It needed more time in the oven, and I'm not wanting to delve too deep into the fanfic rabbit hole. It seems like it could have been further expanded on by, I don't know, having him meet the past Golden Guards? Seems like a golden opportunity, no pun intended, that was left to the wayside. Or at the very least, uncovering the backstory of Caleb to help his state of mind by reassuring him he was at least created from something good? I don't know, it's tricky. You know what else is tricky? When not only do we see these characters performing horrible acts, but also enjoying those acts thoroughly. And that's exemplified in no better way than with Catra and Andreas. They're not the only ones that suffer from these issues, of course. Gideon and the Collector both seem to be very happy to let others suffer for a good while. Man, what is it about the big 3 Disney shows and having a blue antagonist, and having that antagonist be the one to fight back against the big bad in the finale? But in the case of these two, it's made much less of an issue by their particularly young age, as well as other factors we'll talk about soon enough. But also look at it this way. Gideon's a bit creepy and kidnaps the twins once, but other than that, he's just seen as a bit of a pathetic pest until the season 1 finale. Catra and Andreas? So it's not just about what they've done, but how they react to it. Andreas was a really fun villain because he absolutely revelled in what he did. The devilish glee oozes through every horrible act his character does by the end of season 2, and through most of season 3. And though the show does try its best to make sense of the eventual redemption, with a really heartfelt letter, spectacular performance from Keith David, and a honestly pretty decent backstory episode which we'll get to soon, on rewatch, it's still pretty extreme whiplash to go from this.
Later, losers. I'd say you put up a good fight, but I'm not that good of an actor.
To this.
Dear friend.
In the span of like 2 episodes. The letter does result in a lot of his character being redefined, and you could pretty easily explain away his confident wickedness and over-the-top evil as being part of his self-loathing, but no, I don't quite see it. Now, personally, one of my favourite redemptions in media that's happened recently, one that future writers and scholars should learn from, is the redemption arc of my channel, baby, gotcha! No, really, yeah. If you're liking my videos, please just boop that like button or subscribe button real quick, it really does help. I think it does, sometimes the algorithm can be screwy, but it probably helps, and that's good enough for me. Okay, back to Catra. Oh, Catra, we're going to talk about you. But first and foremost, yeah, she's just as bad as Andreas when it comes to this issue, if not worse. With the big guy, at the very least they had the foresight to foreshadow his complexity a little. Not quite enough in my opinion, but they still did it and did it well. Catra? For 4 whole seasons, she is the undeniable villain here. She raises the world the characters are on. She's sadistic and cruel to everyone involved, friend or foe. And beyond any of that, she has no remorse at all. That's the important part here. She is having an absolute blast fucking over the heroes of the story, and past episode 1, we have no reason to assume otherwise. Because yes, she does actually seem to start out more split. As the seasons further progress, she starts getting worse and worse, more and more regularly. It starts getting more and more difficult to show her actions as redeemable. But hey, I mean, nothing's impossible, right? It all depends on what happens after she's left the side of evil. Now, you might be hearing this a lot in this video, but if you want a good example of this, you need look no further than Zuko. He is shown time and time again to not be bloodthirsty or overly vicious like other characters here, or indeed his own sister. It's a great subtle way of showing that this isn't someone who's actively filled with hate and malice. It is indeed someone redeemable. long before we even get to his backstory. A backstory, I might add, that gives plenty of reason and context to his actions. It gives him a motive, which is just about important enough to, you know what, yeah, just do the thing. You know, when you put the text on screen and it's all, wah, yeah, there we go. A motive is, of course, a key piece of the puzzle when it comes to literally every single character to exist. But it's doubly important when it comes to the characters that undergo redemption arcs, because their motives are really what should be driving that arc in one way or another. Like, we were just talking about the backstory of Zuko. Through our detailed looks into the prince's past, we can understand how he became what he became, how that sweet, innocent boy we occasionally see in flashbacks turned into the bitter, cold, vengeful prince of the Fire Nation we see in Book 1. He goes from a whiny, creepy, but somewhat honourable villain to a genuinely complex and fascinating character in the span of a single episode. Now, this idea of a motive is something that's shared by a good few other characters here, specifically the likes of Andreas, Hunter and the Collector, all to varying degrees of success. Hunter's backstory is conceptually horrifying and amazing, but is unfortunately never expanded on in detail, only spoken about by the characters and referenced through details of the world. And the Collector, again, gets to describe his backstory and why he's the way he is, but it's just not quite as effective. It's far, far superior if we actually get to see it. This is something that Amphibia actually does very well with Andreas, giving a full-on episode to explain the king's twisted actions, even if it only explains why he's doing what he's doing, not why he's enjoying it so much, you know? Now here's the thing, it's a pretty good explanation that does a solid job of building up his redemption and the finale as a whole. But oh my god, it should have been a double-length episode because it's so frustratingly rushed. But that's for another time. Right now we're talking about redemptions. Redemptions and motivations, and you know how I said it's majorly important that we know the motivation of our antagonists, why they're doing what they're doing, before they turn? Well, that's because it's just as important to know their motivation after they turn, because, well, that's going to be most, if not all, of their reason for turning in the first place, right? Sometimes it's simple. There could be a threat that's orders of magnitude more dangerous at play. They could just be a good person brought up in the wrong environment. Maybe they just finally realise the damage their actions are causing and want to help fix things. For characters like Zuko or Hunter or Andreas, it's ecstatic to see them finally standing up to those who have been the source of all their misery. And you can really sympathise with them when they're finally understood by the heroes, because it is clear that they have changed. But, once again, let's look at Catra. The girl is given every opportunity to join with the forces of good over the course of the season, and nothing in her backstory, with what little there is, shows why she would be so fanatically loyal to the Hordes. Especially when her and our protagonist apparently grew up so joined at the hip, and she ends up perfectly fine. So, here's the thing. Here's my confession. I actually love Catra's character. I think she's amazing. For the first 4 seasons. And even then, she doesn't drop that hard off for me afterwards. Even in season 5, Catra remains a consistent character. She's a selfish, manipulative opportunist, and is both entertaining and interesting to watch. Even her turning to the side of good, it makes sense, because the Horde is gone, and it's pretty clear there's nothing for her in a universe dominated by Prime. With all that said, you might wonder why I have so much issue with her redemption. Well, to be specific, it's... Now, here's the thing. Zuko's arc throughout the show was absolutely incredible. I've already spoken about it here, I'll probably end up speaking about it again. But the thing is, that whole 2.5 seasons of build-up, of change, of improvement and regression and final realisation, everything he'd gone through, would have all been for naught if he'd just been immediately accepted into the gang, no questions asked. But the writers were smart enough to understand that no, that absolutely wouldn't happen, and even gave them a reason to need him around, so that he could still have these interactions despite everything. You see where this is going, right? Now, before that, Owlhouse and Amphibia actually do this well. The exception is probably Lilith, but considering she's the sister of one of the main characters and was more bumbling than anything else, that one is at least acceptable. Now, for Hunter, I think it's actually rather clever how they go about this. Obviously, we start off with him as just the Golden Guard, who, I might add, is an absolute riot, and I wish we got more confident Hunter because of it. But then, because of his masked nature, we're able to have him interact with Willow and Gus, because neither of them know his connections to the main villain or hero. Combine that with his teaming up of Luz in the Palisman Expedition and Hollow Mind, as well as him helping Gus and Labyrinth Runners, and it becomes pretty easy to understand how he ends up as a frenemy situation and then going to friends from that. But what about the ones that don't form such a connection? How does the story go about showing that they aren't the same as before? Well, for one, Andreas and the Collector are handled similarly, and surprisingly well. The last we see of the big guy is helping to reflourish the world he was at the helm of demolishing. He's in chains and seems to be growing old and blind, so it's a pretty harsh final scene, but because of what we've seen him do, it works very well. And the Collector? Well, we see him reverse the damage he's done to the people of the Isles, and the show makes it very clear that no one is averse to him leaving, except for the one that was able to see him as he was, a scared and alone godchild. I'm split on whether or not to criticise what seems to be pretty severe whiplash when it comes to the Collector and his creepier personality on the lead up to season 3 of the Owl House. On one hand, it's pretty cool that you can understand that he may have just been doing that to try and impress Bellows, but was more good-natured and childish around King, a new, more innocent best friend. And in that case, it's cool it wasn't directly spelled out so obviously to us. And yet, the fact that very little actually expected this before it happened means that it wasn't the best setup. But I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, they were dealt with accordingly. For everyone I've talked about so far, the characters had a very understandable reaction to them, even after they'd switched sides. She-Ra's cast does not. Like I mentioned earlier, I have little to no issues with Catra's story specifically. It's actually very good for the most part. I love her climbing the ranks of the Horde, maybe worth a new video someday. But the reactions of the rest of the cast when she finally turns to the side of goods with one good deed is so bizarre. Like, okay, Glimmer at least does have the reasoning of Catra allowing her to escape, I'll give you that. But even then, after what is canonically years of destruction and terror onto her home, the home that she and Bo and Adora have vowed to protect, and the reaction of them, I can't stress this point enough, immediately after she turns to the side of good are jarring. It's frustrating, and it's made doubly, triply frustrating by the fact that we just had a really good arc dedicated to the falling out of this group. Glimmer making a genuine mistake with the best of intentions as a stressed brand new queen, and having to spend a long time making it up to her friends. It was complex, it was emotional, and it was real. This does not feel real in the slightest. It feels like Catra was the writer's favourite, and is thus allowed to get away with pretty much anything she likes. You ravaged the planet and loved doing it for years? Tried to pull apart the fabric of space-time? Here, have a girlfriend. I wouldn't be nearly as annoyed if, like I said, the show hadn't already done some really great arcs involving these characters and their relationships and bringing their bond back together. And also done a great couple of believable, redeemable antagonists in Entrapta and Scorpia. And, we're not even going to try and touch on the romance angle. That is a topic for another day, and we have way too much ground to cover already without getting into this quicksand pit. But let me be clear that all of this is not okay. Speaking of not even trying to touch, I'm just not gonna cover the supposed redemption of Hordak himself, because even the show knows that's a bad idea. Like, I'm pretty sure if he didn't get possessed by Horde Prime right here, he would have 100% taken the Prime Army for himself and conquered the universe. Yes, he made friends with Entrapta, but that doesn't exactly make up for everything else. Now, this is probably the part where I'd say, speaking of conquering the universe, let's talk about the diamonds. But, to be perfectly honest, I haven't watched Steven Universe. yet. There's a lot of that show, but it's high on my list, and rest assured, I'll more than likely make a video on it once I do so. Hopefully this video has been helpful in showing just what can make a good redemption arc of a villain, and why some of these might work in some ways, and not so much in others. If you're at all interested, here, boom, a tier list of the redemption of characters in these stories, at least in my personal opinion. If you have a different reason for certain characters higher or lower, and I'm sure you do, well, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. While I don't think it can be argued that some characters do have objectively better written, more complex stories than others, some characters are always going to emotionally resonate with people more than others, and I think that's an amazing thing. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. I understand this one was pretty long in comparison to the ones I've made previously, but hey, I had a lot to talk about here. Once I've actually watched Steven Universe, as well as maybe a couple of other shows, who knows, might do a second part to this if people actually watch it. Again, if you like the video, I know it's cliche to say and everything, but even just liking helps me out so much, and if you want to see more of what I'm doing here, I mean hey, subscribing wouldn't hurt either, huh? I got lots more on the way. Thanks again, until next time friends.